It's week 9 of the NFL season, and here are my predictions for this week. But how were my predictions last week? In week 8, I went 10-6 in my predictions. So kicking off the week on Thursday Night Football, the 6-2 Texans versus the 2-6 Jets. The Texans are coming off a 23-20 win over the Colts. CJ Stroud went 25 of 37, 285 yards and a touchdown, which was much better from week 7, where he only had 86 yards. Then Joe Mixon had 102 yards and a touchdown, and Stephon Diggs had 5 receptions for 81 yards, but he tore his ACL and is out for the rest of the season. So the Texans are now down their top 2 receivers with Nico Collins and now Stephon Diggs. So they're going to have to now rely on Tank Dell and Dalton Schultz in this past game until Nico Collins comes back in a few weeks. And their defense was great as well, having 5 sacks and an interception. The Jets lost once again, 25-22 against the Patriots, and they've honestly been the most disappointing team this season. But in that game, Aaron Rodgers went 17 of 28, 233 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he's questionable for this week with a knee and hamstring injury, and was limited in practice on Monday. Then Breece Hall had 16 carries for 80 yards, and Garrett Wilson had 5 receptions for 113 yards. So I have the Texans winning. Then moving over to Sunday, the 4-3 Chargers versus the 2-6 Browns. Last week, the Chargers won 26-8 against the Saints. Justin Herbert had a good game, going 20 of 32, 279 yards and 2 touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins had 57 yards and a touchdown. And rookie wide receiver Ladd McConkey had 6 receptions for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that was his first career 100-yard game and multi-touchdown game. Then for the Browns, they upset the Ravens 29-24. It was a great back-and-forth game, and it actually came down to the last play. But Jameis Winston went 27 of 41 for 334 yards and 3 touchdowns. And that was the Browns' first time this season scoring 20 points, throwing for 300 yards, and having 400 yards as a team. And that 334 yards by Winston was the most yards thrown by a quarterback in their first start as a Brown. Then Nick Chubb had a lot better second game with 52 yards, and Cedric Tillman had a breakout game with 7 receptions, 99 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And those were his first 2 career touchdowns. The Browns' offense looked much better with Winston, and I have the Browns winning. The 2-5 Dolphins versus the 6-2 Bills. The Dolphins are coming off of a 28-27 loss against the Cardinals, and at one point they were up 27-18 in the fourth quarter. Then they allowed a touchdown by James Conner and a walk-off 34-yard field goal. In Tua's first game back from the concussion, he had 234 yards and a touchdown. Then Devin Achane had 10 carries for 97 yards, and Tyreek Hill had 6 receptions for 72 yards. Then for the Bills, they beat the Seahawks 31-10. Josh Allen went 24 of 34, 283 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception, and that was his first interception of the season. James Cook had 17 carries for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Khalil Shakir had 9 receptions for 107 yards. This is a huge game for the Dolphins because with a win, they would be 3 games out of the division, and if they lose, they would be 5 games out. So this is a must-win game for the Dolphins to stay alive. But this Bills team all around has been great this season, and I have the Bills winning. Then we have the 5-3 Broncos versus the 5-3 Ravens. The Broncos are coming off of a 28-14 win over the Panthers, and Bo Nix had his best career game, going 28 of 37, 284 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then their leading receiver was Courtland Sutton with 8 receptions and 100 yards. And their defense had 2 sacks and 2 interceptions, while also holding the Panthers to 5 third down conversions and 284 yards. Then in the Ravens' loss over the Browns, Lamar Jackson went 23 of 38, 289 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also ran for 46 yards. Derrick Henry only had 11 carries, but had 73 yards and a touchdown. And Zay Flowers had 7 receptions for 115 yards. So far this season, teams are 1-6 the week after playing the Browns. and the only team to win was the Eagles. And the Ravens just traded for Deontay Johnson, but I still have the Broncos winning. Then we have the 2-6 Saints versus the 1-7 Panthers. And the Saints lost against the Chargers. Alvin Kamara had a great game with 10 carries for 67 yards and 5 receptions for 55 yards. Spencer Rattler didn't have a good game at all, but Derek Carr is questionable this week and could return. And then Chris Olave led them in receiving with 8 receptions for 107 yards. Then for the Panthers, in their loss to the Broncos, Bryce Young got the start, and he went 24 of 37 and had 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, and this was his best game of the season. He had by far his most yards. He had his only 2 touchdowns, but he still had 2 interceptions. Both of these teams are statistically the worst 2 defensive teams. The Saints have given up the most yards this season, and the Panthers have given up the second most yards. And the Panthers have also given up the most points and are giving up 34 points per game. So I expect there to be a ton of rushing yards in this game. And if Derek Carr can come back, that would be huge for the Saints. But with how bad that Panthers defense is, I think Alvin Kamara is going to have a huge game and the Saints are going to win. Then we have the 2-6 Raiders versus the 3-5 Bengals. Last week the Raiders lost 27-20 against the Chiefs, and this was a much closer game than I expected. Gardner Minshew had his best game of the season, going 24 of 30, 209 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Brock Bowers had 5 receptions for 58 yards. But again, they have absolutely no run game. And in this game, they had 21 carries for 33 yards. Then the Bengals lost 37-17 against the Eagles. This game was tied 17-17 late in the third quarter, but the Eagles would go on to score 20 unanswered points. Joe Burrow went 26 of 37, 234 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Chase Brown led them in rushing with 32 yards and a touchdown, and Mike Gesicki had 7 receptions for 73 yards. And I have the Bengals winning. Then the 6-2 Commanders versus the 2-6 Giants. The Commanders are coming off a 18-15 win against the Bears, and this game had a crazy ending. The Bears scored a touchdown to take the lead with 25 seconds left. Then on that last drive for the Commanders, Jaden Daniels hit Zach Ertz for an 11-yard pass. Then they called their last timeout. Then Jaden Daniels hit Terry McLaurin for a 13-yard pass, and he got out of bounds. Then on the last play of the game, Jaden Daniels threw up a Hail Mary, and the ball got tipped, and Noah Brown was in the back of the end zone and caught it to win the game. In the game, Jaden Daniels went 21 for 38, 326 yards and a touchdown, while also having 52 yards rushing, and the team combined for 168 yards rushing, and they had 3 players with over 50 rushing yards. And Terry McLaurin led them in receiving with 5 receptions for 125 yards. Then for the Giants, they lost 26-18 on Monday Night Football against the Steelers, and they had a chance to tie this game on their last drive. The Giants had a chance to tie this game with 34 seconds left in the fourth quarter, but Daniel Jones ended up throwing an interception when they were at Pittsburgh's 35-yard line. In the entire game, Daniel Jones had 264 yards and an interception, and Tyrone Tracy Jr. had 20 carries for 145 yards and a touchdown, and Darius Slayton had 4 receptions for 108 yards. These teams did play earlier in the season in week 2, and the Commanders won 21-18 and scored 7 field goals in that game. But Jaden Daniels has looked a lot better since then, and I have the Commanders winning. Next, the 3-4 Cowboys versus the 5-3 Falcons. Last week, the Cowboys lost 30-24 against the 49ers. In this game, Dak had 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Ezekiel Elliott had 34 yards and a touchdown, and CeeDee Lamb had 13 receptions for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns. And this week, Micah Parsons is questionable to return, and he hasn't played since week 4. Then for the Falcons, they won 31-26 against the Buccaneers. Kirk Cousins went 23 of 29, 276 yards and 4 touchdowns. Bijan Robinson had 63 yards rushing and 7 receptions for 43 yards and a touchdown. Then Kyle Pitts also had 4 receptions for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns. This is almost a must-win game for Dallas since it's a conference game. They're 1-3 in the conference this year, and they're already 3 wins behind the Commanders for the division. and it would be huge if they could get Micah Parsons back. But the Falcons have won 4 out of their last 5 games. They're also at home, and their offense has been rolling the last few weeks. So I have the Falcons winning. Then we have the 2-6 Patriots versus the 1-6 Titans. Last weekend, the Patriots win over the Jets. Drake May got a concussion and is questionable for this week. But Jacoby Brissett came in and went 15 of 24 and 132 yards. But Ramondre Stevenson had 48 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then for the Titans, they got blown out 52-14 against the Lions. Mason Rudolph went 22 of 38, 266 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Tony Pollard had 84 yards rushing, and Calvin Ridley had 10 receptions for 143 yards. So far this season, the Patriots are last in total yards, and the Titans this season have given up the least amount of yards. But this season, no team has won the week after playing the Lions. But with Drake May questionable, and the Patriots having the worst offense, and the Titans having one of the best defenses, I have the Titans winning. Next, the 4-3 Bears versus the 4-4 Cardinals. Last weekend, the Bears lost against the Commanders. Caleb Williams went 10 of 24 with 131 yards and 41 yards rushing. Then DeAndre Swift had 129 yards rushing and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Rome Odunze with 3 receptions and 41 yards. Then in the Cardinals win over the Dolphins, Kyler Murray went 26 of 36, 307 yards and 2 touchdowns. James Conner had 53 yards and a touchdown. Then on the receiving side, Trey McBride led them with 9 receptions, 124 yards. And Marvin Harrison Jr. had a big game with 6 receptions, 111 yards, and a touchdown. I think these teams are pretty evenly matched, and this game could probably go either way. But the Cardinals are at home. They are only 2-2 at home this season. But the Bears on the road are 0-3. And it's looking like they're going to be targeting Marvin Harrison Jr. a lot more, which they should be. So with that, I have the Cardinals winning. Next, the 2-6 Jaguars versus the 5-2 Eagles. The Jaguars are coming off of a very close loss, 30-27 against the Packers, and they lost this game on a 24-yard walk-off field goal. Trevor Lawrence had a good game going 21 of 32, 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Tank Bigsby had 78 yards rushing, and Brian Thomas Jr. had 3 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown, but he is questionable for this upcoming game with a chest injury. And the Eagles are coming off their 3rd straight win against the Bengals. Jalen Hurts went 16 of 20, 236 yards and a touchdown. Then also had 37 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Then on the receiving side, Devontae Smith had 6 receptions for 85 yards and a touchdown. But also for the Jaguars, Christian Kirk, their 2nd leading receiver this season, broke his collarbone and is out for the rest of the season. Gabe Davis is also questionable this week with a shoulder injury, but their head coach Doug Peterson said he should be good to go. So their receiving core is really beat up right now. This Eagles team is really hot right now, and I have the Eagles winning. Then we have the 6-1 Lions versus the 6-2 Packers, and this is probably the game of the week. And the winner of this game will be first place in the division. In the Lions blowout win versus the Titans, Jared Goff went 12 of 15 with 85 yards and 3 touchdowns. Then Jahmyr Gibbs, on just 11 carries, had 127 yards and a touchdown. And David Montgomery had 33 yards rushing and a touchdown, but also threw a touchdown. Then in the Packers win over the Jaguars, Jordan Love went 14 of 22, 196 yards and an interception, but got injured in this game and is day-to-day and questionable for this game with a groin injury. But after they put Malik Willis in, he went 4 of 5 passing, 56 yards, and a touchdown. So on the season, Malik Willis is completing 74.4% of his passes for 380 yards and 3 touchdowns. Then Josh Jacobs had 127 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, and Tucker Kraft led them in receiving with 3 receptions, 78 yards and a touchdown, and Xavier McKinney got his 6th interception of the season. But even if Jordan Love doesn't play, Malik Willis has been getting the job done when he's had to play, and I would expect this to be a pretty high-scoring game as well, and I think the Lions are going to win. Next, the 3-4 Rams versus the 4-4 Seahawks. The Rams beat the Vikings 30-20 on Thursday Night Football. Matt Stafford went 25 of 34, 279 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. Then Kyron Williams had 97 yards rushing and 19 yards receiving with a touchdown. Then in Puka Nakua's return, he had 106 yards receiving, and Cooper Kupp in his return had 51 yards receiving and a touchdown. With this team starting to get healthy, this Rams offense could be one of the best in the NFL. Then for the Seahawks, in their loss against the Bills, Geno Smith went 21 of 29, 212 yards, and an interception. They only had 32 rushing yards as a team. Then Jackson Smith and Jigba led them with 6 receptions and 69 yards. But DK Metcalf is still questionable this week, and he did miss that Week 8 game. Depending on what happens with the Cardinals game, the winner of this game could potentially be in first place. And with the Rams getting healthy, I have the Rams winning. Then on Sunday Night Football, the 4-4 Colts versus the 5-2 Vikings. Last weekend, the Colts lost to the Texans. Anthony Richardson played horribly, going 10 of 32 with 175 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. That touchdown was a 69-yard pass to Josh Downs, and on the day he had 4 receptions for 109 yards and a touchdown. Then Jonathan Taylor had 105 yards and a touchdown. And Anthony Richardson, after a run play, tapped himself out of the game, and when he was asked about it, he just said he was tired. That's why he wanted to come out. But the Colts are benching him this week and are starting Joe Flacco. Then for the Vikings, in that loss against the Rams, Sam Darnold went 18 of 25, 240 yards and 2 touchdowns. Aaron Jones had 58 yards rushing, and Justin Jefferson had 8 receptions for 115 yards. Then also TJ Hawkinson is questionable for this week and could make his return from his ACL tear. But I'm really looking forward to watching this game with Joe Flacco in primetime. And this Colts offense has been so much better with Joe Flacco playing. And this is probably going to be a pretty close game. But the Vikings have now lost 2 games in a row, so I have the Colts winning. Then on Monday Night Football, the 4-4 Buccaneers versus the 7-0 Chiefs. In last week's game for the Bucs, Baker Mayfield went 37 of 50, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. And he's the first quarterback this season to have 20 touchdowns. He has 21 on the year. And their leading receiver in this game was Cade Otton, and he had 9 receptions for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he's probably going to be Baker Mayfield's primary receiver for the rest of the season, since Mike Evans is out and Chris Godwin's out for the season. Then for the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes went 27 of 38, 262 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Then Kareem Hunt had another great game with 59 yards rushing and a touchdown. And now in 4 games this season, he has 308 yards and 4 touchdowns. Then Travis Kelce had a big game with 10 receptions, 90 yards, and a touchdown. And that was his first touchdown of the season. I didn't know what to expect from the Buccaneers offense last week with all their injuries, but it looked a lot better than I thought it would. So I think this game could be pretty close. But the Chiefs did trade for Josh Uche, and the Chiefs are again adding to their defense, which has already been very good this season. And I have the Chiefs winning again. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.